You want to build a course that will help people, but when you sit down to actually build it, you're staring at a blank screen thinking, what do I actually put in this thing? Welcome to Course Creation for Solopreneurs. I'm Dr. Curtis Satterfield, and I've spent 17 years as an educator and course designer helping thousands of students learn new skills. Now, I help solopreneurs like you create courses that actually transform your students and grow your business. Let's get into it. I helped a book coach named Anna figure this out. She created and offered her first course with 10 spots for $697, and she sold every spot. Then for her second course, she offered another 10 seats at $997 and sold out again. And her students started coming back for high-ticket one-on-one coaching. The difference wasn't her marketing. It was what she actually put in the course. I've spent 17 years as an educator figuring out why some courses transform students and others just dump information. It comes down to 5 truths most course creators never learn. Nobody buys a course because they want information. They buy because they want to be something different. They want to go from, I don't know how, to I did it. They buy a transformation. And if you don't know exactly what transformation you're promising, no one will be interested in your course. Or worse, people will buy it expecting one outcome, and when they don't get it, they'll be demanding refunds. Before you create a single lesson, you need to be crystal clear on 2 things. What's the problem, frustration, or gap that your student is dealing with, and where are they right now? That's point A. Then figure out where they will be when they finish your course and what does success actually look like for them. That's point B. Everything you put in your course should move them from point A to point B. If a piece of content doesn't serve that transformation, it doesn't belong in your course. This is also your marketing message. When you can clearly say, I take people from here to there, that's what sells your course, not some list of modules or hours of content. The transformation is what sells your course. So how do you actually figure out your transformation? Start by thinking about your ideal student. What's their biggest frustration right now? What are they struggling with? Then think about what success looks like for them. That's their point A, and you need to deeply understand their point A. Then think about what success looks like for them. Not what you think they should learn, what they want to be able to do. What is going to make them say, yes, this course was worth it? That's their point B. Once you have those 2 points, write this sentence and put it somewhere you can see it. My course takes people from blank to blank. Everything you build from here needs to serve that sentence. Now you know where you're taking them, but most course creators look at that destination and immediately start overwhelming their students. Imagine you're at a store and you need something from the top shelf. You ask a sales associate and they say, I can absolutely help you get that item. Then they pull out a ladder, put it up against the shelf, and say, there you go, good luck, and wander off. Then, as you're about to get on the ladder, you notice that all the rungs are at the top of the ladder, out of reach. You can't even get to them. That's what it feels like when you don't structure your course and lessons properly. This is why I said you need to deeply understand their point A. Get it wrong, and the course content and transformation is out of their reach. You need to start with where your students are. That's the first rung. Then decide what outcome they need from that lesson to be able to reach the next rung on the ladder. And your next lesson provides the next step. Each lesson has one clear outcome that builds on the previous. They all stack up and help your student reach the top of the ladder. Before you record any lesson, ask yourself, what will my students be able to do after this that they couldn't do before? If you can't answer that clearly, the lesson isn't ready. Here's a simple test. Try to complete this sentence for every lesson. After this lesson, my student will be able to blank. If your answer is vague like, understand the basics of email marketing, that's not an outcome, that's just information. But if your answer is write their first welcome email sequence, that's something they can actually do. That's an outcome. If you can't complete that sentence with something concrete, either rework the lesson or combine it with another one. So now you've got your rungs on the ladder. But if they aren't sturdy, your students are still going to fall off. When I first started teaching 17 years ago, I inherited courses from previous instructors, and I started noticing something frustrating. Students would do great in one course, then show up to the next course in the sequence like they'd forgotten everything. I'd have to spend time going back over previous content, which meant we couldn't get as far in the current course. And here's the thing. Students were expecting specific outcomes. We had them laid out in the course descriptions and the syllabus. If I don't get through all the content, I could get in trouble with the college. So it was stressful. One day I decided to deviate from my planned content and dropped an impromptu hands-on session. I gave them a networking problem I'd actually faced in my previous job and asked them to troubleshoot it. The next class, they were still talking about it. They talked about that day all the way to the end of the semester. It even showed up in my course evaluations. That's when it started to click. The previous courses were just dumping information with no thought of how one lesson connected to the next. No hands-on practice and no way to make it stick. Each lesson has to unlock the next one. Your students should feel momentum, like they're building towards something, not just watching random videos. So how do you figure out the right order? You start with your point B, the transformation, and then ask yourself, what's the last thing they need to learn before they get the transformation? Then what do they need to know before that? Work backwards until you get back to their point A. Then look at your sequence and ask, does lesson 3 require anything from lesson 2? If someone could skip lesson 2 and still do lesson 3, why is lesson 2 there? Either it's in the wrong spot or it doesn't belong at all. You've got clear outcomes in the right order. But here's the thing. You can have the perfect roadmap and build a course that doesn't transform unless you do this next thing. Once I figured this out, the results changed completely. Students started coming back to me years later with stories about how something I taught them actually stuck. One of my students, Tim, reached out and told me about this situation at his job. They had a coworker who was constantly calling IT for support. The other techs were always short with her, accusing her of causing the issues. So they rarely figured out what was actually wrong, and of course the problems kept coming back. Tim got called by her one day, and he said he remembered me very clearly in very animated tones explaining how to handle customers. Now, I always tell my students to be kind and practice active listening. Be sure to frame questions as, do you know if, instead of what did you do? So he followed my advice, and he said it was like night and day. She sat there and told him that coffee had been spilled on her keyboard a few weeks ago, and since then she'd been having issues. But she didn't tell the other techs because she felt like they would have made a big deal out of it and she'd get in trouble. That's the difference between dumping information and actually teaching. Tim didn't remember a bullet point from a slide. He remembered the story and he applied it years later in a real situation. So how do you teach instead of dump? There are 3 things. First, for every key concept, find at least one story or example that illustrates it. Don't just tell them what to do, show them what it looks like in action. Second, after you explain something, give them a way to practice or apply it, an exercise, a worksheet, or even better, a hands-on activity, something they can do with what they just learned. Third, your students aren't you. They don't have your years of experience, so you need to simplify. If you can't explain something simply, break it down further. It's okay to say, I want to make sure everyone is starting from the same place. Your students will thank you for it. Now, here's where a lot of course creators sabotage themselves. They think more course content equals more value. If I'm charging $500 or $1,000, I need 40 hours of content. Wrong. Your student isn't paying for hours. They're paying for transformation. Every piece of content that doesn't move them directly toward that transformation is just noise. It makes your course feel like more work and makes them less likely to finish. Remember, nobody bought your course because they wanted information. They bought it because they wanted to go from, I don't know how, to I did it. So how do you know what to cut? You ask 2 questions about everything in your course. First, does this directly move them toward the transformation? Go back to your sentence. My course takes people from blank to blank. If a piece of content doesn't serve the journey, cut it. Second, is this need to know or nice to know? If you're including something because it's interesting or because you think they might want to know it someday, that's nice to know. Get rid of it. Only keep the things they need to know to get the transformation. If something doesn't help them get there, it doesn't belong in your course. Thanks for listening. If this episode helped you, take a second to subscribe and leave a review. It's the best way to support the show. Also, be sure to check the show notes for any links and resources mentioned in this episode. Now go create a course that transforms.